Afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm an addict. Um, so steps five, six, and seven. They're fairly straightforward, but there are a few points that we're going to need to look at. The text today is the whole of the text, but I won't be commenting on everything, just the relevant parts. We've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. A friend of mine, uh, who I've known for, well, I say acquaintance of mine, I've known for 30 odd years. He was at my first meeting. And I heard him about 10 years ago, and he shared very confidently from the floor that recovery was a long journey towards the discovery of self. And it made me want to jump off a bridge. Now, he's changed his view a little bit in the last few years and discovered that, I think he said a couple of years ago, recovery is all about helping other people. And so he got there in the end, and I got there in the end as well. Uh, I don't know about you, but I thought I was frightfully interesting when I got sober. And many years sober, I thought I was still frightfully interesting, but now in a far more complex way than I'd ever realised. And have you ever heard people say, "Oh, if I'd known when I got sober what I know now, I'd have jumped off a bridge"? No, no, you're going in the wrong direction. So people ask me, more fool them, to sponsor them. And I'll say, why? And then what they do, they say the thing they think is going to maximize the chance I'll say yes. So they try to say something spiritual. And they'll say, I want to go deeper. I want to do a deep dive into myself. Yeah, you're talking to the wrong person if you want one of those. Um, I don't know if you've noticed this, if you've ever read the Bible, for instance. The low places are bad. So the plain of Shiloh and going down to Sheol, which is the old Hebrew word, one of the Hebrew words for hell. And if you're doing terribly well, you're going up, not down, up into the hills. You're lifted up to a higher place. Jerusalem as a spiritual image in the Bible is all about spiritual enlightenment. Same with the word Zion. So up is good, down is bad. That means if you're doing inventory to go down, you're going in the wrong direction. You want to do a quick UE and come back. You want to go up. And the way you go up is by getting rid of the ballast that you're holding on to. So step 4 is not about accumulating things. It's about getting a little pair of scissors and working out all of the things you're going to chop off. You don't need to understand the things that you're chopping off. You just need to chop them off. So step 4 is a list of, actually, to go back a tiny bit. So in step 3, what we've said is, God, I want to do your will. And God says, oh, very good. I'm so pleased. And you say, are we going to get on with it now? What's your will? And God says, wait a second. We've got to do a couple of things first. You've got to change only 3 things. Number 1, what you believe. Number 2, what you think. Number 3, what you do. Just 3 things. On the story of just 3 things, a friend of mine Pauline, who got sober in the early 1970s, had something of a colourful past, and she got into a relationship with a rather gentle gentleman in AA, and she was frightened. If he discovers my past, he's going to think very ill of me. He won't want to go out with me. He won't want to be my boyfriend if he knows what's happened to me and where I've been and what I've done. And the sponsor said to her, you can be honest, but you say this: before you met him, you only had 3 affairs, but you omit to say those were with the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. So you only need to change 3 things: what you believe, what you think, and what you do. Now, again, fine. Why not just say, well, I'll just think new things and believe new things and do new things? It doesn't work like that. Why it doesn't work like that, I don't know. I'm just reporting how the system works. I'm not justifying the system or explaining the system, but this is the system. I will continue to believe and think and do as I've believed and thought and done. Unless something radical changes, I can't simply change. The system appears to require this. It appears to require confession, and then it appears to require amends. To do the confession, I've got to know what to confess. And unless one's memory is terribly good, one has to write things down. That's the only reason step 4 exists, is to give you material for step 5 and step 9. And because people's lives are complicated, you're going to need to write it down. And why is the resentment inventory even there? It's not because we're interested in it. It is because resentment is the defensive mechanism stopping me from doing inventory. So I do the resentment inventory and pray the prayers on page 67. I've now deactivated the defensive mechanism. I can do the inventory on pages 67 to 71, or really 69, 67 to 69. I've got something written down, and it's not because there's anything to learn in there. There is something to be gotten rid of, and the only way to change anything, for some reason, is to speak the thing that I want to get rid of. And then that seems to loosen the grip. And the grip is loosened completely when I make the amends in step 9. And that's what this is about. I take a lot of time over step 4 with people. And as they're doing their step 4, they read out the inventory, but partly that serves as a form of confession, but partly that's in order that we can check they're doing it properly, so they're acquiring the adequate skill of doing inventory. They're then able to pass this on to others, and it can take a little while to get the hang of it. The ego is a master of subterfuge, and language has always, I think, been used to disguise the truth as much as to tell the truth. So the training part of step 4 is all about helping people to say what is true in a simple way without any of the weasel language. I'll give you an example of weasel language. I'm going to get shot for saying this, but when people at some meetings, they'll say, right, we're going to slow the meeting down. And I tell you, when they say we're going to slow the meeting down, I thought the last 45 minutes have been the longest 45 minutes of my life. If it gets any slower, my blood will start to run backwards. But anyway, we're going to, as they say, we're going to slow the meeting down for newcomers and shy sharers. They should say newcomers and vain sharers. If you're so vain, you're worried about what people think about you, so your little hand, you can't even put your little hand up in the air. That's not shyness, that's vanity. And there's so much weasel language. So step 4, the aim is to say things as they are, not to try to coat things. Another thing which is often said is that defects of character are actually defense mechanisms. And I needed these defects of character when I was growing up because they protected me against the nasty world out there. Oh, so when you bullied half the people in your class, that was a defense mechanism, was it? I don't think the people you were bullying would agree that that was a defense mechanism. I've never found a character defect which has adequately defended me from anything. Is vanity a defense mechanism? Is pride a defense mechanism? Is sloth a defense mechanism? They're just defects of character. So what I'm after in step 5 is a simple saying of things as they are. There's no analysis, really. So although step 4, there's lots of discussion, the discussion is in order to get to the truth. Some people can get to it very quickly. I had someone who got to the truth very quickly, and they'd been in recovery for 8 or 9 years, and I think they got through the first 9 steps in about 10 weeks from beginning of 1 to the end of 9. But that's extremely unusual. Most people need quite a lot longer to get to the truth. It's a little bit like, actually no, I won't go down that path. It's going to take a while. But the step 5, once you've got the truth, it doesn't take long. Somewhere between an hour and 2, often a lot less will suffice. I like this line, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. Now, just a little point. When people quote the book, it's quite legitimate to take a single line and riff on it. So to rip it out of context and then to say things about it, that's simply a way that we use material culturally. But one's got to be terribly careful. If one, rather than just riffing on something, really wants to understand what people meant, one has to take things in the context in order to get to the truth of the message they were trying to send. So I give you a good example. I was at a meeting last week when they were talking about we agnostics. And it's very fashionable to say it's the worst chapter in the book. I think it's the best. But anyway, it talks there about the question, God is everything or God is nothing. And now in the context, in step 2, where it's got to is it said, look, the God idea works for Sally and Andy and Peter and George and all of the other people in your home group, and there are 1,000 other groups in your city, and there are tens of thousands of groups throughout the world. It's worked for all these people. The question is this God person universal or particular? Is God just picking out a few individual people to help, or is God universally available to everyone? That's the context. So God is everything would mean God is universal. And so if God is available to them, God is available to me. If God is not universal, God is nothing to me. There is nothing I can do with the idea. But someone at the meeting last week said, yes, God is everything. So God is in everyone, God is in everything. Now, you can hold that philosophy, but I really don't think Bill is squeezing in pantheism as the philosophy of the AA program to say that God is the table, God is avocados, God is concentration camps, God is the planet Venus, God is all of these things, just masquerading as. That's a very, very specific theology. I would not I don't think Bill was trying to spatula that into the program. Pantheism is the way to go. No, he's leaving it very open. If you read it in context, you won't make the mistake. Now, in this line, there is a phrase which is taken out of context until they told someone else all their life story. And certainly in certain other fellowships, the habit has developed. They'll do it in treatment centres, I understand, and in Al-Anon, certainly, it's suggested as one of the methods of step 4 to do and then this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened, and then that happened. That ain't a moral inventory. You take that line in context, and what that really means is you want a 360-degree review of your life, or a from beginning to now picture of your life. It's not a catalogue of events, it's still a moral inventory. So one's got to read things in context. Now, this learning enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty, you can learn all you like in a step 4, but there's nothing like saying it to someone else to burst the bubble. And the most important bit of this is when the other person just stares at you and says nothing and says, right, what's next? Unmoved by the thing that you've said. I try and keep a poker face when I'm listening to inventory. If I've got a good relationship with a sponsee and it's jokey and it's fun, I might well say, you did what? But only because we're used to joking about things. If you got someone a bit sensitive, I remember in a step 5 many years ago, someone was about 10 minutes in, and I tried to shoehorn in a little comment, and his face distorted into this scowl of, I don't want to go there. I said, I won't say another word. Carry on. When you're done, you say the end, and then I'll know we can talk. So there's no obligation to give that most awful word, feedback. I don't need to give feedback. If they want to chat about it, great. But there's no obligation. But there's something. I remember when I was 15 years sober, I'd done a thing, and it wasn't a good thing, and I had a step 5 scheduled. I had a sequence of step 5s scheduled with 3 different people. But this particular secret, which I'm not going to share with you now, this particular secret, because I've shared it, just because you've said it in a step 5 doesn't mean you need to now tell the world. I'd done a thing, and I said to Brian, I called him up before the step 5 and said, look, there's one thing, I just want to get it out of the way there. And I said, this is what I did. He said, yeah, that's really bad. Don't do that again. I said, okay. And then that was the end of that. It's just embarrassing. A friend of mine said a few years ago that the reason you have to step 5 it is because once you've step 5'd it, you really have admitted to yourself it's objectionable. It's the coating of justification has now gone. Now it's gone on the naughty list. There's no confusion. Is it on the naughty list? Is it on the nice list? No, you've put it firmly on the naughty list. He says it's much harder to do it again once you've step 5'd it. And it's really hard to do it again when you've step 9'd it. And if something is persisting, perhaps I haven't step 5'd it or I haven't step 9'd it. What else have we got? In other words, to sum up that little section, I'm telling all, and it needs that embarrassing moment of another human being witnessing it to make it real to me. Just one point about this, admitted to ourselves, to another person, and to God, the exact nature of our wrongs. And also, by the way, exact nature of our wrongs, not defense mechanisms. It really is a moral inventory. It's not a mistake. There is such a thing as right and wrong. There's a very good speaker from many years ago who said there's no right and wrong, there's just what works and what doesn't work. Now, I really think there's a right and wrong. There's a character, there's a little bit here where it says, he wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. When I do things wrong, it creates this pocket of guilt until I've admitted it and amended it, and then I'm cleaned of it and I can carry on. Guilt is a sign, as long as the guiltometer is correctly calibrated. Guilt is a sign I've done something morally wrong, not merely tactically wrong, not merely inefficient, but morally wrong. It's part of the design. It's there for a reason. And that guilt acts as a block between me and other people. And it also acts as a block between me and God. There's, if you don't mind me citing this, Adam and Eve do something they shouldn't do. What do? Hide. It's a block between me and God. So when I act immorally, it's blocking me from others, it's blocking me from God. This is why this stuff has to be gotten out of the way before I can go to God and say, what do you want me to do today? I can't go to God and ask for God's will at the same time I'm trying to hide from God because I feel guilty. Because at some level one knows that it is not the world that punishes one, or God is behind everything. Now, if God punishes, whether God punishes, I think God really says to me, yeah, that wasn't very good, don't do it again. Let's go and have dinner. That's my feeling. I'm not a theologian. Ask a priest. But I've got to do my part. Tom W. says about this, it's like you're knocking on the door of heaven and you say, can I come in? And God says, absolutely. But I need you to clear up a couple of things first. Confession, in the AA sense, confession, just, I don't mean Catholic confession, but tell someone and then clean up your mess. Then you can come in and you say, can I have a little bit? Can you bring out a little plastic box with a few tidbits from the feast? God says, no. You have to pay the admission price first, which is the embarrassment of all of this. Anyway, so now we know what step 5 is about. We're interested in the question of how you find the right person. Rightly and naturally, we think, well, before we choose the person or persons, person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course will, want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. Now, of course, one can go and do confession. And I suppose that might count as a step 5. But good luck finding a priest who'll sit there for 2 hours while you're trotted out. They're going to want to speed through it a bit quicker than that, unless you're very lucky indeed. And those are the ones that hear confessions. To me, that would be an imposition in this day and age to get someone to hear the whole thing. You can scoot through the character defects and individual dark crannies in a confession if you've done a full step 5 before, but that's different. Personal persons. Now, the reason it says that, I think, is chiefly because it's going to talk about dodgy bits where you don't want to broadcast that to someone who might be affected. So it says you might want to take that bit to someone else. But there's an important feature of step 5. With almost no exceptions, it's better to find one person who can hear the whole thing rather than dividing it up between different people. And this is because the ego will whisper in your ear. You'll trot out some of the bad things you've done. Let's say 7 out of 10, and you're reserving the 3 for someone else. And the ego says to about the person you're saying the first 7 to, if only they knew the rest, if only they knew the full truth, they wouldn't be so nice to you. And then you go to someone else with the remainder, and the voice says the same the other way round. You kind of need to say everything to everyone to know that they know the full truth. And if they say, as my sponsor did after my first step 5, let's have pizza, you know that it's real, rather than saying, I never want you to darken my doors again. There's the famous shell game, the trickster game, where there is a pea under one of 3 shells, and they move the shells around, and you have to guess which shell the pea is under. And whichever one you guess, the pea is hiding under one of the other shells, and you always lose. And it's a little bit like that with secrets. If you convey 99 secrets but keep one back, the ego hides your awfulness, your purported awfulness, behind that one little secret. You've got to lift up all the shells to realize there is no pea under any of them. You've got to reveal every secret to realize that there is no justification for the assertion that I'm a piece of dreck. One's got to say everything, or the ego will say, there's a darkness in you which will separate you from others forever. There is something broken which will never be healed. One's got to get everything out. What's next? We search our acquaintance for a close-mouthed, understanding friend. Now, obviously you want to go to someone who can keep a confidence. That's pretty straightforward. But understanding is important. There's a line later on. It is important that he be able to keep confidence, that he fully understand and approve what we're driving at, that he will not try to change our plan. Now, I don't think when it says personal persons, it's instructing us to take step 5 with more than one person. There is some evidence, I believe, I'm not really an AA historian, there is some evidence that in the early program one tended to talk through one situation with half a dozen people, particularly in Cleveland. I may be wrong on that, but where they'd get a person to be multiply 12-stepped. But Paul Martin, a Riverside, Chicago, who died with over 60 years in the early 2000s, I think. He discovered at around 15, 16 years sober that there was a great benefit in sharing one's step 5 with more than one person. And my practice, when I've been in real trouble and I've needed to do a really full step 5 as opposed to just the sort of quarterly cleanup exercise, I've needed to read out the whole of the step 5, first person, second person, third person, fourth person, until I'm so thoroughly bored of it, I'm no longer embarrassed. There's a great benefit. I don't think that was intended as a formal thing, but I found it hugely beneficial. Now, the second thing, which is perhaps a little bit controversial, is the notion that one might actually need to do a step 4 again. I think the 12th step suggests this. We practice these principles in all our affairs. If we practice the first 11 steps in all our affairs, it's not just the last 3 steps, it's all of them. So we may well need to do another step 4. Now, there is a school of thinking to say that you ought to be able to live in 10, 11 and 12 so perfectly, you never need to do another step 4. Bob D is very good on this, where he says, That's absolutely right in theory. Problem is, we are not saints. None of us have been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. In other words, if one had a perfect 10, 11, and 12, one would never need to go back and do another step 4. Problem, no one has a perfect 10, 11, and 12. Things are going to need to be renovated. Cars need an MOT, kitchens need a refurbishment, human beings need a very, very thorough clean out. Now, the reason I say all that in part is because when I've had sponsees and I've said, right, I've heard all of your step 5, go and read it to a couple of other people. You've got to make sure you're reading it to people who themselves believe in the principle of continuing to take the steps for the rest of your life. Not obsessively, not as an exercise in endless self-indulgence, but a periodic 360-degree review. If they don't believe that, if they think their single step 4 is going to see them through to the end of their life with a bit of light dusting in steps 10 and 11, and you go with your great big door stopper step 4 and 5, you're either going to appear to be very self-indulgent to them, or the fact you're going to them with a step 4 and 5 is an accusation that they ought to be doing the same. If they had as good a program as you, they'd be doing a step 4 and 5. And I've seen people have bad reactions trying to share inventory with, let's say, an old timer who last did a step 4 in 1978. But they simply don't buy the system. They don't buy the idea that you need to redo it periodically. Maybe they don't. Maybe they genuinely don't. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I think some people are just built differently. So I think it's important to go to someone who is, as it were, of the same type. Someone who gets themselves into hot water and needs to do a 360-degree review and a really thorough scour. And I don't mean deep, thorough. A friend of mine who's trained in psychoanalysis, and I hope I'm not misquoting here, but the focus might be, when looking at the unconscious, not things buried deep down inside, but things lying on the surface for everyone to see, which are sitting there in one's behaviours, one's words, the things which are visible. And that's what one is working with. And I think it's the same here. So to be thorough doesn't mean to be deep and abstract. It's picking up everything which is in sight, in absolutely plain view. Question here. We cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. Especially if in your step 5 you're going to be reading out your resentments. When you're reading out the resentments, often those are against people in AA, and then you'll CA, whatever A. You're reading them out often to people who know the person you resent. Don't do that. Say, I'm resentful against person X for this. Choose someone maybe who doesn't know all the people on it, or who doesn't know any of the people on it. It can't be used, as it often is, as a way of covertly gossiping about everyone in your home group. One has to exercise some discretion here, because it's about the substance of the resentment, of why one is even resentful. It's not about the other person. Also, I think it's very important, if there is something extremely distasteful, particularly certain forms of criminal behaviour, you want to be a bit careful. I, as a hearer of step 5s, and I let sponsees know this during the step 4 process, if you have anything on your step 4 which involves cruelty to children or cruelty to animals, I'm not going to want to hear it, and I'm not going to want to know that it's even there. You'll just have to share that with someone else, but I can't dislodge that from my mind afterwards. I don't have to hear anything I'm uncomfortable hearing. There are plenty of people with thicker skins that can hear that stuff and be unaffected. I can't. And that's fine. But you let people know well in advance. I know a couple of people who caught me unawares in a step 5 with stuff to do with animal cruelty. I find it, I've forgiven them, but I don't want to talk to them ever again. I don't want to sit next to them. I can't do it. So there we go. What else? So the actual instructions themselves. We have a written inventory and we're prepared for a long talk. I may have said this before, but maybe not. A friend of mine, someone came to him and said, "Can you hear my step 5?" He said, "Yes." And the person says, "I've got 10 hours of material." And my friend said, "You'll have to find someone with 10 hours of time. I've got 40 minutes next Tuesday." And once I had a step 4 and I phoned Brian and said I'd like to do my step 5. He said he was free next Tuesday between 4 and 6. We would meet at his house in Camden. We would walk to Paddington, and I would be done by the time we reached Paddington. He knew I had a job, and that was during working hours. He didn't say, "Are you free then? Let's find a time that's mutually convenient to the both of us." No, he just said, "This is when I'm free. You sort it out." And he didn't say, "How much material do you have?" He told me when the beginning was and when the end was. And he said, if it's not done by the time we get to Paddington, well, that's the end of it anyway. When I got there, it was blowing gale force winds and rainy, and so I was trying to read this step 4 out with pieces of paper with which were like blotting paper by the end of it because of the rain, walking past people on the streets. It was very awkward, but that's what he made available. Very good for my humility. And perfectly ideal. He says you always want to do a step 5 walking, but there's nothing worse than having to stare at the person's face for hours whilst they trot all this stuff out. Spare a thought for the poor person having to listen to it. Go and walk in a nice park so they've got little things to look at whilst they're listening. They're not listening. They are genuinely listening, but there's nothing worse than the intensity of just staring at each other. This is not about getting to know each other. This is about being prepared to cast something out. We're prepared for a long talk. Now, as I said, I go through step 4 slowly, but once the step 5 is ready, people can go and just do 3 step 5s, 1 hour, 3 people. First person 1 hour, second person 1 hour, third person 1 hour. I've heard the whole thing. I don't need to hear the summarized version. We explain to our partner what we're about to do and why we have to do it. He should realise that we're engaged upon a life and death errand. That assumes that the person you're doing this to is not an AA member, because this was written before AA really existed. So don't go to people in AA saying, "I'm on a life and death errand." They're like, "What? I thought are you not just doing your step 5? Excessive, "I'm doing such an important thing." No, this is run-of-the-mill stuff these days. So don't over-egg the pudding there. Now, you think we're going to get we're getting to the good bit now. We're going to get to some really specific instructions on how to do it. And all we get is this. We pocket our pride and go to it. Well, that doesn't really tell us anything. Illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, wait a second, is that it? Apparently that's it. Those are the instructions. 2 things. I've heard people say, not "I'm going to do my step 5, I'm going to read out my step 4. They could have written, "Read out your step 4, but they don't. They say, "Illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past." If this were a research study, the step 4 is the gathering of field data. And the step 5 is the presentation of the findings. The field data may fill a room or 5 servers full of data, but the article published in the medical journal is 6 pages long, clear, succinct. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's got 2 elements of content: dark cranny of the past, twist of character. Twists of character, that's really a synonym for defects of character. And a good way to convey a defect of character is to say this: I am a thief. And then you say, I stole a Cadbury's cream egg when I was 9, and 200 other things. You don't need to say each of the 200 other things. You say, I am resentful. I have resentments. Give an example. You don't need to read all of the resentments. No one cares, because those aren't your defects of character. The twist of character is the fact you resent. Now, every dark cranny of the past, that the content of some of the resentments might come out there. Those are my secrets. And they can be the secrets of the awful things that I did, or the secrets of the awful things that I experienced. Start with the worst, work backwards until everything else is trivial. I use the St. Augustine prayer book, Sacraments of Penance list of character defects, that's a mouthful, to do my quarterly reviews. And it's basically a catalogue of all human character defects, and I go through and I say which ones I've got and an example of each. And I've got it down to, when I do one of these reviews, I might list 100 defects or 70 defects with an example of each. And I'll tell you how long it takes to read out: 10 minutes. Defect, example, defect, example, defect, example. The example, 1 sentence. You can say a lot in 10 minutes. It doesn't need a whole story behind each one. Now, the first step 5, give yourself a break, maybe an hour or 2. But there's nothing like being able to walk around the whole thing in 2 hours. There's a group which will be unnamed, but it's near me in London, where the culture is the step 5 takes 1 year to 2 years. You go around to your sponsor and you talk about 1 resentment a week, and you talk about it for 2 hours, 3 hours, and in a couple of years you're done. And that wouldn't be my style. The great benefit when I did step 5 the first time, we talked about the material. I had, I think, 7 pages, 7 pieces of paper. I read it out. We talked for a very brief time about it. The whole thing was maybe an hour and a half. I don't remember exactly how much. And I had an overwhelming feeling at the end. My God, the unhappiness of the last few decades can be summarised on 7 pieces of paper and gotten out in a few minutes. That's it? That's what was causing my problem? Boy. And someone said to me, they quoted the Pet Shop Boys song, "You make such a little go such a very long way." And I tortured myself for decades over trifles. If you spin that out over 2 years, you're not going to have that realisation. So, short, sharp shock. Secrets, anything which you feel is a block between you and anyone else, and twists of character. I think the twists of character is the moral bit, the dark cranny of the past is the life story thing, and it pulls it together. What else? So once you've done this, I'm not going to read out every word. It says, returning home, we find a place we can be quiet for an hour. Probably a good point to start popping questions in the chats. Carefully reviewing what we have done. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have admitted anything. Basically, I'm asking myself there, is there anything else? If there is, make a note, call your sponsor, get it out onto the table. And most people have 2 or 3 things. An acquaintance of mine reported that someone said, when they called up after the hour, there's one more thing. And the sponsor said what? He said, I'm in debt to the tune of £400,000. So it's possible for something like that to slip a person's mind. I mean, we've got memories like sieves. Sometimes it's the most important thing that comes out after that hour. It's amazing. It's interesting. And if you need to do that exercise more than once, do it more than once. Step 6. Once you're clear, first 5 steps done. Step 6. We've emphasised willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things we have admitted are objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Right. You could write a book on step 6 and 7, and some people have. I've never read any of the books on step 6 and 7. They just make me tired. The thought makes me tired. Sometimes people say that they're the overlooked steps, or, Bill just wrote a paragraph or 2, and this was clearly a terrible mistake. And, there's so much more to be said about step 6 and 7. And then they write the essays about 6 and 7. Fine. I think Bill was on the money the first time. In the 12 and 12, the publishing format was to do an essay on each step. It doesn't mean there's necessarily much more content. He's filling the chapters. What he says is interesting, but how necessary is it? I don't know. What does the removal of defects mean? Now, it doesn't mean that a faculty within me is removed. So let's say the faculty of malice or the faculty of conceit. And I'm using those moral terms on purpose here. I'm a human being, therefore I'm capable of malice. I'm a human being, therefore I'm capable of conceit. The removal of a character defect doesn't mean that the capability to manifest it is removed, and I'm thereby rendered incapable for the rest of my life of being malicious or being conceited. The possibility remains there forever. Therefore, the removal is the removal of its acting out. And defects are either internal or external. They're essentially a pattern of thought, an attitude, a pattern of thought, or they're a behaviour. Therefore, the removal means not believing the thing I used to believe, not thinking the thing I used to think, not doing the thing I used to do. Nature abhors a vacuum, so I'm not left there just an empty vessel. The removal happens via substitution. I substitute new beliefs, new thinking, and new behaviour. But doesn't it say God does the removal? Well, yes, except as with everything, earlier on in the book, it's going to say that it's impossible to remove self entirely without his help. That means we have a job to do. Anything which is doable by me must be done by me. So the removal, I remember a very grand old man in AA 1,000 years ago said that his view of step 6 and 7 was this. He's like someone at a banquet, and he looks at this dirty plate in front of him, and he says to God, waiter, please remove this for me. God does not remove my defects the way a waiter removes a dirty plate. God removes my defects by saying, I want you instead to believe this, to think that, and to do this list of things today. Therefore, willingness is the willingness to actively foster new beliefs, to actively think new thoughts, to practice the new thoughts, to do the new behaviors. There's a wonderful video by the American comedian Bob Newhart. This video should be conference approved, but it's not yet, where a woman goes to him, he's a therapist, the character, and she explains all of her neuroses, and he says, "Oh, I've got some advice for you." And she says, "What is it?" And he leans across the table and he says, "Spit." And she tries to raise something else. He's, "Spit." And that's the answer with all of these. One can't do anything with defects other than not do them. You don't do anything with them. You drop them, and you drop them by substituting something else in its place. Now, the thing is, there are only two systems for living, because it's like when you're driving with a satellite navigation system. You can only have one, essentially, you can only have one destination set. I can only live by the ego, guided by the ego, or guided by God. And so this willingness is not an individual willingness with each single defect. It's a willingness to simply abandon self entirely and live on the new basis of trusting and relying on God. There's a single question here. It's not 1,000 little questions carefully working through each defect of character. We've already agreed that the defects of character are manifestations of self. Self does me no good. If self does me no good, none of its manifestations do me no good. I don't need to work through why with each one. It's implicit in the fact that defects come out of self. The point of a defect is that it is bad for me and everyone else around me. There's an awful lot of self-indulgence sometimes in CA around character defects, and people are kept in step 6 and 7 for months or sometimes years. I simply don't understand. If you get to the end of step 5 and you're like, "I'm not sure whether I want these defects to be removed," I don't know what to say to you. If this process hasn't made you willing, good luck to you. I've nothing else to say. If you're like, "Get it off me, because it's disgusting, you just hate it, you're just sick of yourself, and you want to live a new way," good, we can work with that. When ready, we say something like this: "My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen." We have then completed step 7. Bill said, you can only do step 1 perfectly. I think you can do step 7 perfectly. Do you want to know how? You say that prayer and you're done. That's it. One can do it perfectly. Now, there's the implementation in 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. Those turn out to be the practical method by which the defects are removed by substitution with something else. But the step 7 is done. I don't repeat the step 7 prayer every 8.5 seconds. There are lots of prayers in the big book for daily use. And then there are prayers for special occasions. I reserve the step 3 prayer for special occasions. Step 3. I reserve the step 7 prayer for special occasions. At home, we've got our everyday plates and we've got the Royal Worcester. We only use the Royal Worcester for fancy occasions. If you use it every day, it stops being special. One thing Tom's sponsor would say: your defects will be removed, but they won't be removed far. They're still within removed, not eliminated, removed, not extinguished. They're still at arm's length, in the same way that a drink always remains an arm's length away. a defect remains an arm's length away. There is a daily reprieve from the defects as there is from anything else. So that's that on that. We've got a couple of questions already, so pop some others in the chat. We'll have maybe 10 minutes of questions. How do you get clarity for yourself in what is morally right or wrong with things that are regarded as trivial? The magnitude has got nothing to do with morality. It's the nature of it which determines whether it's right or wrong. For example, thinking vanity can be helpful in keeping your mouth shut instead of arguing with a colleague or someone in public. If arguing has no merit, and to argue is to commit violence on someone else to no purpose, it's morally wrong. And that's the end of it. Don't fuss over this. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. If you're not sure whether something is a character defect, if it appears on a list of character defects, it's a character defect. That's the end of it. So keep it simple. It would be my advice there. I'm working with a fellow who delights indulging in resentments towards his partner. How do you work with someone who says he trusts God but relies on self over and over? Let him go, try harder, or leave him to figure it out as I'm not the higher power? Okay, so I have two sorts of conversations with sponsees. Conversation number one goes like this. They read the next line of the book or the next paragraph, and I explain my experience on it. They take notes. Not very interesting, but that's the core of sponsorship. The other situation is when someone says, I have a situation in my life. This is how I'm applying the program so far. This is my best understanding, but it's not quite enough. Can you give some input? Can you take me further? Or maybe even simply, this is my view of the situation. I'm not certain for the following reasons. Can you help out? If I'm giving information for the first time, that's great. What we're talking about here is people with recurring problems, the same thing over and over and over and over and over. I sponsored someone a few years ago who we're going to call Sally. And Sally was a great one for coming back to the table with the same thing over and over, typically resentments or fears or whatever. And after a while, I twigged what was going on. So I said, I'd like you to go to Ryman's, it's a stationer's. Go to Ryman's, get a pad and bring it back. And she got the pad. She said, I've got the pad. And I said to her, on the cover, you want to write this, Sally's Book of Solutions. And she wrote it. And I said, every time you present a problem, I'm going to present to you what I think the program would say the solution is, and you're going to write it down in that book. And whenever you have a problem, you go to Sally's Book of Solutions and see if the solution is already in there. That will save us ever saying the same thing more than once. And if she tried to come at me with the same thing, the same problem wearing a different hat, I'd say, go and look in Sally's Book of Solutions. And she'd call back later and say, yeah, I found it. Sorry about that. And she learned how to assimilate the program and apply it herself. The point of helping people with problems is to give them the ability to solve the problem themselves with God's help, not to be the eternal answerer of questions. So what I'll often have to say to people is, I've already covered resentment. We never need to cover another resentment again because they're all the same. You didn't get your own way. End of. Some people just want to talk about the resentments, and I'm not interesting. It's just I have enough of my own. Boring. So, question from someone. I've heard sponsors say your fourth step will be used for step 8 to write out each act which will require an amend. Yet in step 5, I'd said, just exact nature and then an example. You see, this is the point. Step 4 is not step 5. Step 4, let's say you're a thief and you've stolen 200 things, or you're a bit trigger happy with the southpaw and you've punched 100 people or 200 people, you need to put down all the names. Here's a list of people I punched, and just write the list. Here's the list of people I was beastly to, write a list. But you don't need to read out all of the, I punched Sally, I punched Rupert, I punched Peter, I punched Bobby. You're not saying any more by just repeating the same sentence, but with a different name at the end. There's not a greater confession. It's not like in The Simpsons, the opening credits where he's writing lines on the board. That's not a good step 5. So the step 4, particularly when you're looking at the wrongs towards others, that does need to be complete in step 4, but it doesn't take long to do that, frankly. And then the step 8 absolutely has to be complete. There we go. So now there are no other questions for now. We'll give it another minute or so to see if anything else comes through. But otherwise, I think we may be done. Anything else, Keith? Oh, there's one here. Can you speak to any experience with aiding sponsees who remain blocked after step 5, perhaps due to trauma history? The trouble is with the question, in terms of I don't know what is meant by blocked. Maybe bring that up in the next session when we're looking at step 8. Also, I don't use technical language. I don't use the word trauma because it can mean 1,000 things in 1,000 different situations for different people. It's unhelpful. If you're trying to explain a problem, always use concrete, not figurative language. Say exactly what you see. And the link, by the way, is going to be, I'm sure Keith will post it on the website, which has got a link to the recordings. So that's it from me.